going in blind. I don't know if the mic's going to be weird because I had to change something I don't normally have to change. Taxes.
Yep.
That is a thought.
Totally makes sense, the whole felony tax evasion thing with all the mob. It's like,
I am of the opinion that you should have to... Okay, hear me out first. I mean this literally. You should have to pay taxes, by which I mean during tax season. The onus should be on you to write a check to the government for them to take money from you. The fact that it happens automatically and you couldn't avoid taxes even if you wanted to is kind of dumb. Like, I'm not saying that it shouldn't. I mean, I am saying on one level that taxes shouldn't be a thing. I mean, to a certain extent. And thus, not paying them shouldn't be illegal. But I mean, you should have the freedom. I understand that it's a law. But you should have the freedom to break that law and pay the consequence.
Well, what would the consequence be?
Well, it's prison. Obviously, in an ideal society, well, you could argue all sorts of things. Perhaps I'm getting too heady about it. My point is, the way it should work, even with the laws not changing. Let's say, like, you're still required to pay income tax for the time being, and not doing so is a crime. And you'll get, the feds after you if you don't do that for long enough. We'll take that as given. I still think you should have to pay them yourself, which would give you the option to not pay them. Now, I'm not necessarily saying even that means like they shouldn't come after you for doing that. Because obviously if it's until the laws are changed, you'd be breaking the law. But you should still have the option to do it. Because technically speaking, if you're willing to pay the price, you can do whatever you want. If you're willing to go to prison, there's nothing you can't do.
I suppose.
So
if they made it more like medical bills, where you would owe it, but for instance, I always think of, for those people that have fallen on hard times or what have you, where they go, I literally have no means of paying this because of what happened this year or whatever it may be.
Well, I suppose that's why they switched from this system.
But I mean, it would make sense that it would function more like medical bills, and it's like, okay, we understand that, but you still need to pay us something, therefore it's going to be like, this amount per month to...
I guess there's just a libertarian instinct in me that says... Until the laws are changed, which is, that's not even the point of the discussion. Because here's the thing, morally speaking, you should not go out and rob a liquor store or whatever. But as a free agent, if you're willing to do the time, you can actually do that. Like, I don't recommend it, morally and practically speaking. But you do have that choice as a free agent to just say, I'm going to go commit a crime.
Sure.
And if I get caught, okay. That's part of your mental calculus. So if you are of a libertarian bent and you want to stick it to the man and say, I'm not paying my taxes, the fact that you can't even do that, I think is a problem. Because
it's like the
property is...
Do that.
Well, you can't. The best you could do would be to file a fraudulent tax return.
No, I mean, evasion is a possibility.
Not really.
You can't, yeah.
Okay, 100%. If you're you'd have to be self-employed and to be able to direct your own income stream at that point.
Correct.
But even then, mostly the way you'd be doing it is by falsifying. You wouldn't truly be not paying.
Imagine if you dealt in only cash, though. You just, there's no way that they could garner wages.
Well, but you can't just deal in only cash. You'd have to receive only cash, which, again, that would only happen if you are self-employed, and even then. I mean, you'd have to essentially be getting your money criminally for that to be the case.
Well, that's true, yes.
So it's like the fact that you don't even have the capacity to not pay taxes, I think is a problem. Because even if you should be punished for doing so, that should be a choice you can make. The fact that your taxes are withdrawn from you before you even get the money, if you're working a normal type of job.
Well, that's only with the W-2, though, like with 1099.
But that's going to be a massive... That is a large proponent of how tax money is processed is automatically.
I mean, sure, I would say probably 70%
and even
argument, but I mean, there are tons of independent contractors that, in whatever field that have 1099s, and at that point you do have
but I actually used to have a 1099 when I was in college, because technically I was an independent contractor for a delivery company. But,
So you had
What they sent to me was saying, here's a document showing everything we paid you, and this is what you would owe. And
sure.
and that also they send to the government.
Yeah.
They don't just send that to me. So I could theoretically, and back when I was doing that, I didn't make enough to have to pay taxes. So I don't even know what would have happened if I had to. I suppose I would have had to do what I'm saying now, which is write a check at the end of April or whatever. But even then, the only way you could get out of it would be by falsifying your tax return to make it seem as though you don't owe money.
Yeah.
And thus, I'm just saying, I think it's troubling. But anyways, this is what we were supposed to be talking about. Just thinking about it, being that it's tax season and government, whatever's going on.
Oh yeah, we got hung out to dry this year.
I was afraid of that actually because of because of job changes and the resultant like bracket. Because I don't actually know, to be honest, but I'm probably in a different bracket than I was previously now.
That's kind of true for me.
And
but the problem is
also
I bounced around to different 1099 jobs and then eventually settled on being self-employed, and essentially they just tear you a new one.
Oh yeah.
They go, "Oh, you're working for yourself?" No.
Well, that they would have done that. Yeah, you'd have. They do that anyways. I gather when you have to do it yourself. That's why you oughta. What's this? There's a whole scheme for how to do it, where it's basically you form a LLC or a what is it? Basically, the lowest form. I think it's an LLC. Is basically the lowest form of corporate structure. And then
LLC is the lowest form of corporate structure.
And then you can move from that to another one, which is a little bit has some tax. I don't know.
Independent.
I'm not in a position.
Independent. All I know is independent owner operator is a bad one.
Yeah.
Even if you're joint filing with.
I was also concerned because I had to do, there was a period when my retirement benefits expired at the previous company because it was like, oh, you don't actually have enough in here to keep this after the plan was terminated. But I didn't have the new one yet. So they just had to give it to me. And I'm like, so I'm going to get a massive tax hit from this, aren't I? But technically I already did, I suppose, before I even saw the money. Again, before the money even came to me, the government was like, you're withdrawing this too early. We're going to take 30% of it. That's just criminal. Now we're talking about taxes. I was going to talk about art and fulfilling things, but now we got to finish this thread.
We're talking about criminality, period.
Well, I guess
I just find that it's annoying that basically criminality hasn't changed. It's just that it's been legalized in certain contexts, which we've talked about before.
Well, not really. You have to know it hasn't been legalized. You just have to know.
What's the difference between what the government does and what a monopoly would be? I mean, it's
not a monopoly. It's fraud mostly that the government does.
Sure, but I'm saying then you look at
something
like medical bills and you go, okay, they're just literally like there are threads of.
I mean, insurance is the problem
within the medical insurance. Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. But there are threads of medical insurance where the hospital will literally double bill something and call it something different, essentially.
Well,
just
the reason,
basically to milk all the.
The only
all
reason
the money
that they do that, though, and they can do that, is anytime your government subsidizes things, there's going to be fraud. We've learned that recently, but I think we all knew it. Now we just can prove it. But when medical insurance becomes mandatory, then any insurance company can say, well, private or not, we're getting paid. So we'll just hike the rates and we don't care because the government, you're not even going to be the one paying us. The government's going to be the one paying us, and thus we'll tell them that it costs whatever we want to say it costs. And that's what we're seeing in literally every department is just going, inflate it with whatever because the government will pay it.
But the problem is it's when the government does things like USAID where they do the whole weird pillow fluffing and shit.
Well, that's what they've been doing. But they do that. That's everywhere.
I know.
That wasn't the only place.
It's just baffling.
I would love to see a complete inversion of the government relationship to the workforce, where it's like because I've never. Well, actually, I have technically speaking worked in I haven't worked in a government job. I have worked for government contractors, and the way you expect it is they'll pay anything, but they'll run it through like 8 guys before they approve it. And that's dumb. Where it's like you could charge them whatever the heck you want and they'll definitely pay it, but they will be super meticulous about like making sure all of your forms are filled out correctly. I'm like, I want it to be the opposite. I want it to be like the government won't pay you a nickel until you've got every single thing in line. It's like, yeah, that'll make government contractors angry, but it'll make the rest of us a lot happier.
Well,
because it means the government's not just going to sign any blank check it wants. It's to be like,
Right.
I'd like to see all of the bureaucratic power of every other like form filling DMV kind of thing. I'm picking on the DMV for obvious reasons. I'm saying that kind of litigious, bureaucratic, paper pusher kind of attitude. I want that entirely redirected towards government finance.
which makes
Like
sense.
we literally
to me.
will not give you a nickel until you can prove exactly what this is for and show documentation that you have it.
To me, that makes sense because that's it.
You had to buy another
benefit-
box of screws for this
benefit
project.
requires
Well, you're
that
going to
you
have to show a receipt.
Exactly. I mean, it's like the
It's going to
benefit
have to be
then
a photo
requires-
ID with the receipt, and your face is going to have to be in the background.
Benefit requires the meticulousness of saying I have to be, super. I don't even know.
So what kind of taxes are legally, or not legally, philosophically justifiable?
I mean, state tax does still make sense to me because of
Are these pop
infrastructure. No, they're twist.
You sure?
Just got to be a man about it.
Oh, my fingers are all chapped. Ouch. That ain't nice. That's what you get for biting your nails, kids. Can't twist off Pop Tops. Ooh. Yeah, sales tax makes sense because arguably...
Well, no, I was saying state tax makes sense because of infrastructure.
Well, but we
in my
don't have
opinion.
state income tax. Well, I mean, what is, quote, state tax? State tax usually refers to state income tax, which a lot of states don't do.
No, I'm not talking about income tax. I suppose I'm talking about property tax to a degree.
I'm okay. Property tax makes sense because the argument would be, I think it makes more sense on a state level than a federal level.
Right, that's what I mean.
But the argument is if you own a piece of your state, you're benefiting from that state's infrastructure.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
And therefore, a certain tax, I think, is reasonable in that regard. I think currently it's wishy-washy because it's based on things as nebulous as appraisal, which is, I think, another scam.
No, that's very true. I think it should be based on things like utility, like water, sewer, that kind of stuff, and then road maintenance, which arguably is, the only word that's coming to mind is just not going to work for me in this context, but it is very negligently handled in my estimation, based on
you might be biased negatively, given the fact that Texas roads have been known to be crap for decades.
Yeah, but I mean, like when you have in county, when you have literally neighbors fixing their own roads because the state won't do anything about it, it's like.
But see, in some
well,
ways,
that's
I'm like,
absurd.
well, that's fine though.
It is, but it's
Probably be done better that way anyway. Be like, I worked in asphalt for 30 years. Government won't fix it. I'll do it myself.
I don't know.
Yeah, because arguably from the libertarian / classical conservative perspective, the only 3 correct uses of government are national security and trade regulation. I said 3, and that was only 2. I forget what the third one is. I think it's internet. I think trade is usually broken down to interstate and international. So it's like, okay, sales tax makes sense because that's trade related. It's facilitated. The government facilitates trade interstate and internationally. So whatever you're buying most likely came from another country or another state. I suppose you could make an exemption if you could prove that it's like if you buy something at a farmer's market, you don't have to pay tax on it because it came from the guy up the road. But that makes sense. And property tax sort of makes sense. It's like, okay, you're benefiting from, even on a broad scale level, the only argument you could make property tax-wise from the federal perspective would be, I guess, strictly speaking, you are benefiting from the United States military's existence by owning a piece of American property. Like if the Chinese parachuted into your backyard, the military would show up. So I suppose you're benefiting from it in that perspective. That's a fringe case, though. I think it makes more sense to pay your state because you're literally benefiting from state infrastructure at that point. But that's all I can think of. Income tax is just a hellish concept. Luciferian, you might say.
Yeah.
Estate tax is actually the most disgusting, or inheritance tax. It's like, that's actually really
despicable
evil.
to me. Because it's like not even the dead get to keep their own money.
No, and they've already paid, that guy probably already paid taxes on that. He paid taxes while he was working, then he gives it to his kid, and the government's like, nope.
I found this out recently, and I'm not going to explain how. That
Ketamine.
When somebody dies, they put $1 billion lien on all of their accounts because of the fact that they want to make sure.
Oh, just as a holding?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they want to make sure that the money goes where it needs to go first.
I know we audited you your entire life, but we're going to audit you one more time before you go.
No, not even that. It's basically like to make sure before anything gets moved around that it goes to the right places as far as will. I'm like, okay, can you imagine being the legal what is it called? The somebody's
solicitor?
No. When you are the
person who
one who handles all their legal affairs,
a lawyer.
No, but I'm saying like when you can appoint a family member as the
power of attorney.
Power of attorney, yeah. So when you are like the power of attorney for somebody, could you imagine like your mom, your dad, whatever, dying, and then they just now you have access. You don't have any access to any of their accounts. You can't even bury them properly until the government decides you can. It's like, no, this is absurd.
It's gross. Question is, how do you get around it? Cash.
Well, I literally told my wife today. I said I'm starting to get to the whole like in the mattresses thing because I'm like this is.
Well, that's why grandparents used to be like that. It's like,
I don't trust banks, Mr. Potter.
We don't trust the bank because why would we? And any rich person knows, yeah, you shouldn't.
Well, and
bank owners probably are going, yeah, you shouldn't trust us.
I feel as though they saw the collapse, so they had a reason why they didn't trust them.
Question is, how would you do it?
You do have to be essentially so wealthy.
How did the Killdozer guy do it?
Pardon me?
You're familiar with the Killdozer story, surely. If we're talking about libertarianism and taxes and all that stuff. I forget his name. Guy built a tank out of a bulldozer and wrecked a bunch of properties in his neighborhood because the city council was screwing him over. Because he did it somehow where it's like he gave basically all of his money to his father, who was old, years before he did what he was planning to do. He kind of had this, sounds a little bit morbid, but it's like he knew his dad was going soon. So he gave him the money well ahead of time. And then the money then passed from when his dad died. It was passed to all of his siblings, and he basically made sure that he didn't get any of it because obviously he knew what he was going to do. So essentially, all of his siblings got his money. The government couldn't get their hands on it because it's like, okay, well, not only did he make this transfer years before to his father, and then his father died and left the money to the kids. So it's like, there's no legal justification for getting it back now because the first transaction already took place too long ago and it's now gone through a will after that. So there was like, well, okay, but how do you do that without a family member having to die? Is there a way to just withdraw money? I guess you'd have to do it where it's like every time you go to buy groceries, get an extra $20 from the cash return and then just stuff that in the mattress.
Right.
And be like, that's the only way you could hide that money from the government. Just be like, oh, where'd the extra money go? Well, it's groceries. It's inflation, don't you know?
Or have an income stream that is purely cash.
Those don't exist, though.
They do. I assure you.
Criminally, they do, but you're already going to be in trouble.
You're now perjuring.
No, I'm talking about hiding money from the government. That is not by definition a crime.
I agree, but what you're accusing me of is saying simply because I have a means of earning cash.
Well, you shouldn't be disclosing that. I'm saying if you're earning cash only, unless you're doing like, okay, I mow my neighbor's yard every week. It's like, okay, those kinds of income, but those are never going to give you huge. If you're making a lot of money, like livable income off and cash only. That
You're
is
leveraging money for money. Yes, that's true.
that is most likely a dubious enterprise.
Dubious, I will grant you, but not inherently. The legality question is a little
Well, because it's
dicey.
undeclared and whatnot.
Right, but see, undeclared doesn't. Outside of buying a home, which I found out was really absurd, because you could have gads of money in external sources, which I actually did at the time, and they basically told me, "Yeah, your money's no good," which I find to be just ludicrous. I'm like, I could have literally 20 grand or more sitting aside in order to put down on this house, but because of the fact that I don't have it in digital line, you say no, that doesn't exist. It's like, oh, I assure you it does. And anyone,
Briefcase.
like, I mean, come on. I don't know. I find that to be just the most ridiculous. Just,
Well,
I don't know.
20 minutes is probably long enough for that.
Well, there you go.
Totally derailed ourselves right from the get-go.
Get
but
to
we
the
were
cash. That's
we were
all
too
I'm saying.
angry. Yeah. I don't know what to tell you. That's probably not a bad idea. Every time you buy groceries, just get a little bit extra out in the cash return
Skim
system
from yourself.
and stuff it in a
Garner
mattress.
your own wages.
Yeah, stuff it in a mattress or a safe somewhere. Just be like, that's the only way you could withdraw it and have it as physical cash without the government wondering where you're spending your money. Just be like, it's groceries, man. Thank Biden.
No doubt. I'm not exaggerating. That has been the most ridiculous. It's been a while since I've been shopping with my wife, but I went this week and I was just, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, that is not a sensible number at all.
That is not a small number.
It's not.
That is a big number.
I remember my grocery bills when I was growing up in a family of 5 being like 3 digits. That's okay, fine. But not
My grocery bills as a single guy
More.
were 3 digits.
than that. That's all
I mean,
I'm
I
gonna say.
ate well when I was in college. I guess I can thank the government for that too. I'm paying for it now. But yeah, like it was 100 more. It was like $200 a month, which was, I mean, that was just about anything I wanted, really. So perhaps I didn't have to do that.
Sure.
But that was part of that government delusion. The government said, hey, you can just have money. And I was like, can I? And now I'm like, no, I couldn't. Anyways.
And then you woke up at home.
I wanted to talk about something serious and potentially moving.
Oh, moving.
Potentially. And we're going to even clear out an old topic. Because I was thinking about this old topic, and then it led to even newer topics. That's what happens when you plant your topic seed. It'll grow.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
So what it really began with, careful there, I got stuff on that. Began with the distinction between the concept of being an audiophile and a term I didn't know, but which I suspected existed, which is a melophile or mellophile. I'm not sure what that means. But essentially, I know what it means. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Because what I was curious about is, like, I don't know that I would call myself an audiophile, if only because audiophiles seem to be primarily technically minded people. Not to say that I'm not technically minded, but allow me to explain. Audiophile does not explicitly refer to music. Now, most audiophiles are also people who like music, but I get the sense that it is music as a means of appreciating higher quality audio. Whereas for me, I would want higher quality audio as a means of appreciating music. And I do get the sense from a lot of audiophile guys that it's the reverse. They're like, no, I actually just like audio. And music is one way to appreciate high quality audio, but they seem to be like, oh no, yeah, I use these headphones or this sound system just for movies and games because it sounds better. I use this just so I can have clearer phone calls. Or it's like, okay, you seem to be an odd person who.
Oh, see, that's me.
Well, see, I figured that's why this would be interesting. Is because I
would 100% listen.
Because I am only now, as someone who has, I guess, been more deliberate about my musical tastes. Only now am I getting interested in higher quality headphones, but it's not because they're higher quality. It's because I want to listen to music. And it's like there is definitely a sense that some people who are audiophiles
But I wonder
only listen to music so that they can hear better audio.
I wonder.
It's like an
though,
excuse.
if there's a bleed over where
I'm sure
as
that
you start
there's got to be a hefty chunk of middle Venn diagram.
No, but I mean, as you start to, it's a bit of a cyclical there's a recycle that comes around when you start listening to higher quality audio, then you appreciate it on its own as you're listening to your music, and you go, wow, I wonder what else this would change in my life as far as movies or whatever else. And then as you start to do that, then you go, whoa, my phone calls are so much better on these kinds of things, and I'm going to go this way. And then
I don't know that I care. I mean, it's like, I'm sure that you could appreciate that. Like, I imagine if you have a nice set of surround system, then watching movies probably is uniquely interesting in that environment versus just in a normal.
What I've found is, but
I don't know that I would seek that out
as a geometry nerd, which is odd because I'm not specifically one to
I'm not. It is odd because I'm not sure how you're going to bring it back to music.
Mathematically, I don't know that I am the most astute person when it comes to just math in general, but geometry and trig were always my favorite. Well, this is why I qualified.
I'm joking.
I
am most certainly not. I just thought the way you put that was funny. Who is?
You.
No.
But
who is the most astute mathematician?
But to say that on a geometric level, or even I suppose spatial, I appreciated about higher quality audio that it changes. It's less about the quality of the sound and more about sound stage, about how your ears actually perceive.
I hear people describe that, and I can imagine that being cool, but I would only be interested in that
on a music level.
I mean, it could be. It would be interesting in a movie setting where it's like you're wearing nice headphones and you can get that.
Hear the difference in where people are at in the room. I mean, that's so cool.
That would be to me a fun benefit, like a bonus. But for me, it's like, well, no. The reason I'm getting into this is because I want to be able to appreciate music better.
Sure.
And obviously, the sound staging, in my mind, is not a product of better headphones, because it, technically speaking, isn't. Obviously, you need the better headphones to appreciate it. But that's the product of the audio. Well, see, this is the difficulty is it's a product of the mixing of the music.
Producing,
it's in the music that they staged it that way.
Correct.
And some people, I think, are like, they don't care what it is so long as the audio is good. And I'm like, well, no, I definitely care.
No, I care what it is.
I don't care how clear the projector is if you're not going to play something I want to watch.
I suppose
I don't care how 4K the monitor is if you're just going to play static.
But you're going to get a truer reading of what the producer intended when you...
Well, or the musician.
And
that's why you do it. Not just because, it's clearer and I can hear a soundstage.
That's true with movies,
I guess it's true with all those things, but those are minor. It's like, okay, if I'm hearing footsteps in a game extra crisp and clear, it's like, okay, I guess that's a bonus of having these headphones, but I certainly wouldn't spend the money so that I could hear that. I'd spend the money so that I can get the better music, and if it also means I get better video game and movie surround sound headphones, then that's a bonus, but I wouldn't spend the money on that.
Sure.
Whereas I get the vibe that some people are like, I would spend the money just so I could hear my desktop alerts clearer. And I find
that's odd. A little...
Yeah, but some of the audiophile people are that way. I get the sense there's very much a heavy IT nerd overlap.
I don't know.
It's like I'm interested in the tech. I'm interested in the technology and the digitization and all that stuff. And I'm not going to say that there aren't creative, artistically minded audiophiles who really want the higher quality audio experience for the sake of music or similar things. But I find they are more the IT nerd side than the musical.
For me, it's a little bit of both because I have actually produced music before. Like when it comes to mixing.
Well, that'll be useful
down
for
and
when we
all
get
that
into the
kind
rest of this, because we're going deeper.
So I'm saying, like, when you understand where hertz actually sit and why it is that a particular sound wave will come through in a manner that is this versus, that, you can look at a graphed EQ that is actually either flat or heavily bassy based on what they build the actual headphone or whatever you're looking at to be. You can appreciate what they're doing because, like, for instance, you take like a good quality open back that's meant to be what they call like a true sound. As a mixer, that's an ideal setting because I want to mix the bass guitar to be what it's actually going to sound like present, like wise in the room. And if I have a set of headphones that tends to yield more bass inflection than is actually true to the room, then that's going to actually then cause me to mix lower the bass guitar, and then I'm not going to actually have a proper reading, if you will, within the mix. But then you get on the back end of that production, imagine me being in the studio as an editor, mixing down a particular sound wave and then sending it out on a track or what do you call it, a stem, or even putting it onto a CD back when I was a kid. No, but like when you put that out there, then the person that is on the audio file on the receiving end is going to say that they're hearing that thinking that's what I intended, but I actually didn't mean to mix the bass that low because I was using the wrong headphones. That was a long, convoluted way of me saying there are certain applications I feel like you do have to have a particular set of headphones or
from what I gather,
equipment from
people who do this professionally they tested on they put it on their car speakers. I mean,
right,
you want every conceivable way you'd hear it. I'm just saying, to me, it is a technology in service of an art, and I'm interested in the art. So the technology is useful because it serves the art, but I find that some people, and this is foreshadowing, seem to be more interested in the technology, so they go in search of art that justifies the technology, which I find a bit odd.
I don't know which came first for me, the cart or the horse. I'm not really sure.
Chicken or the egg cart? The egg cart or the chicken horse? Well, I've teased basically the deeper side of this, and so as I was pondering this topic, it occurred to me, I was like, well, I don't know that anyone who didn't know me well would think that I was a musical person. That I'm like, oh man, I really like listening to music on a serious, like, deliberate level. Because everyone, quote unquote, likes to listen to music in the same way that everyone, quote unquote, likes movies. It's like, you'd have a hard time finding someone who expressly said, no, I don't like watching movies. Yeah. They would be an unusual person. But there's definitely film buffs and then the general public. And I used to be a general public person when it came to movies, and I have recently, in the past several years, made more of an effort to be like, I'm going to actually engage with the art form of filmmaking on a deeper level, because there's stuff there that's interesting to see. And music has been a similar thing, but I suppose there is the trope, there's the caricature of someone who's really into music, which I don't think I fit. I don't think you'd look at me or interact with me on a basic level and be like, oh, wow, I get the sense this guy really likes music. And so as I was thinking about it, I was like, well, I certainly do. I mean, it's why I'm interested in now, in recent days, I've been researching proper headphones, because I'm like, I want to actually, and again, for the purpose of listening to music, not just for not having nicer headphones.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, I was like, well, part of the reason that I might not give off that impression is because I am not this is going to sound perhaps, I didn't frame it this way when I was thinking about it, but I could even make the argument, depending on certain definitions, that I'm not overtly a musician. I know how to play several instruments, but I actually don't even know that I would identify myself. Like, if someone were to ask me, like, hey, tell me about yourself, musician's not the word that would come to mind.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I thought so too, because I was like, it's odd because I play more than one instrument. And then it occurred to me, I was like, well, the reason for that, I can postulate, is that I don't seek out, I guess the better way to put it is, my interest in music is almost exclusively on a consumerist side. I enjoy listening to music.
I would not have assumed that.
But I've never really, whenever it's like, it seems it always comes across as a touch pretentious when you refer to yourself as an artist, but I suppose I have at least some qualification to say that. As an artistic person, music has never been the outlet, which is interesting. And this is where I figured you'd find this would be a good discussion, because I know that you'll take an opposite approach.
Well, and it's diverting because, interestingly enough, as much as I have the capacity to do things like paint or draw, I don't find myself yielding to that as much as well. Whereas you have found more of a
here's where we
medium
cracked
than
the
that.
surface, because the topic, as I wrote it down, was essentially discussing art, visual versus, auditory art.
Wow.
And the thing that I found was interesting, and I knew instantly this would be a good, interesting juxtaposition, is just that it's like, okay, even in recent times when we talked about Arcane, where it's like you keep talking about the music, which I was like, that's odd that you're so fixated on it, because to me it is a supplement, whereas you're seeking it as like, no, this is what's really hitting about this.
Right. There are certain...
And that's what led me to believe there must be something deeper in this distinction of why is it that I enjoy consuming music, but whenever I feel an artistic instinct, it never comes out as music. It comes out through visual art. And I know you are the opposite of that.
But I also am almost exclusively an auditory learner too. So I'm curious whether that has something to do with it, because you're also visually far more
Would I
geared.
call myself a visual learner? I suppose by process of elimination. Auditory, I mean, you're talking about just doing something because someone tells you how to do it. I don't know that I would do that very well.
Versus kinesthetic, which is like the people that like have to actually touch it and
I suppose I do
experience it.
definitely would prefer to see something done in order to do it. I guess that's, yeah, I suppose.
That's a fascinating thing. I don't know that I've ever considered that.
Well, here's how I think it gets even deeper. Going back to something Ayn Rand talks about in the Romantic Manifesto, because that's a book I can't recommend
That's a
enough.
book.
It is. It's a book I can't recommend enough. It's actually probably it's been a long time since I think I've read a book that influenced me as heavily as that.
Particularly within the art context, or just
No, just in general. Because it was one of those books, obviously it's not a fiction book, and fiction, I don't know that I've ever read fiction that hit me as hard as a more philosophical, because it's a book about, essentially it asks the questions of like, what is art and why do humans do it? And so that's like, it shaped the way I think about the topic significantly, because it's like, okay, these are actually very helpful definitions, because art is such a vague and nebulous concept that discussing it is actually difficult, whereas this gives a very clear and I think consistent framework. But the way she describes it, and I think this will make sense to you, and you'll see where I'm going, is art by definition is a recreation of reality affected by the worldview of the artist.
Sure.
Essentially, you take a subject, and that subject can be anything, you present it or you represent it through either a sculpture or a painting or something, or even dance or things like that. And you present it in such a way, whether consciously or not, the way you view the world has already viewed the way you saw the subject.
Right.
Like
For me, it's almost entirely conscious.
The way you view something obviously affects And that's a subconscious thing. You might think, well, you're just, I painted a picture of a bowl of fruit because there was a bowl of fruit. It's like, well, but the way you saw the bowl of fruit
Right.
was affected by the way you see the world as a
But I
whole,
think
and
I
thus the
keep-
way you presented it in your own version was affected by that.
I feel that I keep that at the forefront of my mind as an artist, though. Like, I mean, it is a rendering, no matter what you're doing, it is a rendering of life according to
Yeah,
you.
and that's why you can have something like a favorite artist, is because you essentially you tend to gravitate towards artists who see the world similar to you. You're saying you produced something. There's a quote, I can't remember exactly, but it's saying, in a literature context, the quote was, but I think it applies to other things, saying, the great pleasure of literature, I'm heavily paraphrasing, is occasionally coming across a passage that feels as though it was written for you, as though some hand through history has reached to the page and taken yours. It's like, that is why you resonate with certain art over others, is because something in the way that artist sees the world is similar or perhaps even the same as the way you see it. So they present something in a way that says, that's how that makes sense to me. I feel a kinship with this person.
Well, and as an artist, I would say anytime I sit down and actually pen something or put something out there, my chief objective is to communicate myself clearly to others.
Well, but see, the thing that's interesting about it is that you don't even have to do it consciously. You can't
Sure.
not do it.
Sure.
You will always imbue your own worldview into a thing you're creating simply because you can't not.
Right.
But this was interesting. That's the broad definition of art. She does break down the difference in some ways between visual and musical art, because in a visual context, you start with a subject, whatever it is you're portraying, and then the artist, if he knows what he's doing, portrays that subject in a way that communicates something he wants to say, but he does it through the subject. Mm-hmm. And so you have to present the subject in a way that will evoke the feelings you want the audience to have. And this is why Impressionism actually caused quite a scandal in its day, because prior to Impressionism was, I am certainly no art historian, so I may be getting some of this wrong, but the gold standard before Impressionism was how realistic could you make the thing? How much did it look like what you were painting?
Yeah.
And Impressionism threw that out the window and said, Impressionism is actually not even meant to look like the thing. It's meant to evoke the impression of the thing. It's meant to have the impact on your mind the thing has when you see it, not just to recreate before your eyes the same thing you would have seen.
Right.
And in some ways that does, there is a metaphysical assumption or assertion in that, essentially saying, you could argue, and people did argue, that promotes a subjectivist view of the world, that it's like nothing, it's almost, you could even go so far as to say like it's a rejection of reality itself in favor of the solipsistic impression of your own sense. It's like this doesn't recreate reality, it simply gives the impression it gave me. And in so doing, you are putting that above reality. You're saying my own reaction to this thing is the primary and reality is the secondary. And that caused a bit of a stir, and I could be poorly synopsizing the scandal, but it's like there is truth to the fact that art has baked into it a metaphysical assumption, because just about anything you do has a metaphysical assumption baked into it.
But I think they were far more overt about that.
Sure. But in any case,
like one of my favorite paintings is Salvador Dali, like the clock melting. Yeah, I love that one because for me it's an
that's not even impressionist though. That's straight absurdism. That's like Dadaism.
I would call it impressionism
or surrealism, but I mean that's
maybe
the same
surreal.
thing.
Yeah, I mean, but the idea is you're taking something that is in reality, and you're saying I'm superimposing what I want to communicate with it, which is that I mean, to me,
Because
that
here's the thing.
communicates time as not as fixed as we might think it is. It's far more transient than, you know.
But the whole point in all of this is, in order to communicate these kinds of things, you start with a subject in visual art.
Sure.
You can mess with the subject all you want. You can distort it in order to communicate, but you're starting with the subject because you have to. That's the nature of visual art. You have to present something first for the communication to happen thereafter. On most of the communication is on the part of the viewer. What they see in it is kind of up to them. Obviously, if you've done your job right, you can lead them to the thing you were thinking, but the communication is facilitated by the subject, you could say. And this is her argument. And music, she says, is the one form of art where this is inverted. A composer does not start with a subject. He starts with an emotion or a experience, for lack of a better term, that he wants the audience to have, and then whatever subject comes to mind is entirely up to them. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting because you could say, for example, the first thing that came to my mind was, when anyone in the olden days heard like The Four Seasons by Vivaldi, did they know that was the title of the piece? I doubt it. The
Right.
whole point was that the reason the song, it does not feel like spring because the song is called spring. The song is called spring because it's meant to feel like spring.
Right.
And that's why, like, the name, it's not a nominal determinist kind of thing. It's not like, oh, this is a song called Spring, and that's why it makes me think of spring. You could not know that that was the point of the song and just hear it without knowing the name, and it would, if it's done well, which in this case it is, it would evoke that sense in you.
Sure.
And this is where I think the meat of it comes from, is you, especially for like in all of our discussions about Arcane, have found it interesting that I tend to seek out subjects as a means of exploring emotion or experience or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I
and
see where
you
you're
think
going
you
with
find
it.
that's like, oh, you've remarked it as though that's odd, which to me is strange because I'm like, this is surely the only way to do it. That's me being pretentious again. But that's when I realized, I see. This is why you're more interested in the music, is because the music goes straight to the emotion.
Well, it's not only that. It's even the way I approach as an artist, but it's the abstract pared down to the subject, whereas you start with the subject and extrapolate to the abstract.
That's kind of how you've described it. And that's when I thought, okay, this could be the key to understanding that difference.
Very much so. I think that's true because I find I wouldn't even say that it's pretentious for you to be like, I don't know that there's any other way of doing it.
It's pretentious of me to assert that I'm correct.
Well,
about something so subjective.
I don't know that you've ever asserted that. I think it's a squidge myopic, maybe, but I'm better than you all. I think it's interesting to see two different. Now my mind is going a bit crazy with the idea that it's related to the way that you process the world. Like, meaning,
all art is.
No, but I mean in that, again, the whole idea of learning and how you take information in. For me, it's largely auditory, and for you, it's largely, physical. Or, I mean, it's not physical, but visual. And you go, that is then the way you approach appreciating art as well. I mean, it makes sense.
Well, but you see, this stuff that wouldn't entirely explain why it is I enjoy listening to music, but why I don't ever seek to create it. And I think the reason is it's not that I can't grasp the meaning in music. In fact, I can. That's why I appreciate it. But when I want to express something, the way I'll admit, I think it's just because I don't know how to do it that way. Because to me, it makes sense to take a subject and express it in such a way as to convey a thought. I know how to do that. I know how to say, okay, I will take this subject and I'm going to present it in such a way as to give my own meaning to it. I don't know how, in a musical context, to create an abstract feeling.
Well, it's the same thing that you talked about with Four Seasons. I literally sometimes sit down at
Well,
the
I see. I
piano
wouldn't know how to
and
do
I
that.
begin to construct, and
If you were to say write a song that feels like spring, I don't think I could.
no, but see, that's starting with the subject again. I literally sit
Well, but see,
down.
then the question I suppose is, did Vivaldi want to do that?
I don't know that he did.
I have no clue about the history of the
at
song.
least for me,
Or did he just mess with it and think
Moses
this makes me
Fantasy.
feel like spring?
Moses Fantasy, one of my favorite
The
songs.
person, I thought you were talking about Moses, the biblical figure, had
No,
a
have you
fantasy.
not- Have you never heard that song?
Oh, this is a song, not a person.
Yes.
I thought this was okay.
It's a symphonic.
By who? Is it modern? It sounds modern.
No, it's not modern.
I thought your sound, based on the sound of it, I figured this was some sort of neo blues singer,
No. It's
like Minnesota Fats, except he's a pool player. But it's that kind of name, mustard slacks.
Paganini.
I have heard of him. I don't know him much.
He's an Italian composer.
Could have guessed that.
Well, yeah. But that one has such movement from.
Moses Fantasy. Is it based on the biblical
I almost
corpus?
feel like not necessarily. It doesn't feel
Well,
like it
now
to me.
now you've raised a whole bunch of questions, because another one that comes to mind, I can't remember the composer, but there is
Have you listened to
there
that?
is an orchestra. There's an entire symphony which is broken up into songs or like movements for the 9 planets at the time. And so it's like Jupiter and Mars, and they all have their own symphonic movement. The question then, I suppose, is my first reaction is, and it was a assumption I hadn't even thought to criticize, is that the composer must have sat down thinking, how would I make a song to embody the idea of this figure, of like what kind of a song would Jupiter have? Almost Peter and the Wolf like, where you're saying, okay, what instruments will represent this character
There
and
are
that
times
character?
maybe
And I suppose
I'm doing that.
that's not necessarily how it happens.
No, not always. I would say it's 50-50. Sometimes I'm sitting and I'm saying I'm wanting to express the emotion that I'm feeling right now, which is a subject to a degree. It's just an abstract one. And then
Is it a subject, though? That's the valid question. Is you're going, can an emotion be the subject?
Sure it
Or
can.
is the emotion...
Love being an emotion, or fear being a subject. I mean, it can
But
be
you
a subject
couldn't
of a
paint
sentence.
fear. You could paint something such that fear was communicated, but the fear is not the subject.
But see, that's I think what
This is where the visual.
This is where music.
Well, this is precisely what Ayn Rand says. Is you're going. If you were to ask me to paint something that represents fear, I would have to say. My first thought has to be, what's the subject, and then how do I make that subject represent fear? And that I can think of a way to do that.
Whereas musically,
how
you
do
could
you
literally
represent
just-
fear? Just to be like, well, I mean, the best I could think of is like, well, you just some kind of discordant tones.
Yeah, it's dissonant minors.
and that's awfully vague.
Well, it's vague, but that's the beauty of being able to capture something that just.
But see, then the argument
feels
is it's not the
way.
strictly speaking, and this is where I know even mentioning Ayn Rand is going to rile people, because she definitely was black and white about things that probably some people don't think of as black and white. But it's like with something as nebulous as art, you almost have to draw the line somewhere.
You do. I don't.
You can quibble over whether how faithfully it is, but it's like I'm on it. It's far more useful for the discussion to just say, because I think what you're describing is that's not the subject. Then it's the emotion.
It is
the subject
but
and the
that's what I'm
emotion.
communicating.
Sure. And
In both
in music
cases,
you
I
can
suppose.
communicate it directly. You don't have to go through a subject.
Correct.
But that's where I'm going. I don't know how to do that.
That's
admittedly,
fascinating, though. That music is literally
This
a vehicle of bypassing the subject directly to the.
well, it's not exactly bypassing it. It's just a reverse. You start with the emotion, and then you leave it up to the person to determine what the subject is. I think a sophisticated musical listener would, even if they didn't hear the piece, would know that spring was meant to represent spring, because you can just sort of sense it.
Yeah.
So
But even
if the artist does
lyrically,
his
that's the
job
case.
well, they can communicate the emotion such that you arrive at the same subject, but they don't need that subject to communicate the emotion.
I will.
And
give
that
you-
admittedly takes a level of expertise I don't understand.
I'm considering something right now that I think is an interesting path to take, which is that, and this could maybe lead into one of my frustrations with things like poetic stanzas. But
see this.
So-
Get into it.
But if you lyrically are listening to a song, obviously the artist had a particular thing in mind when they they captured not only that emotion or whatever they've tied to with the underpinnings of the music, but also with the lyrics. But what's fascinating is there was a guy who came on, I believe it was America's Got Talent, and he sang Jealous, that song by, I can't remember who it's by. That's weird.
Is it a modern song?
Yeah.
I may or may not have heard it on the radio or something. It sounds vaguely familiar.
It's by Labyrinth.
I wouldn't have known that.
But he sang it, like it's the communication very obviously in the song is a guy with a girl that he's not with anymore, essentially. And it's a very, like, it's clearly expressed in the song. However, it's also interesting to me that the person receiving the song can also feel and apply it to something different, because in this particular case, this guy came on and he's singing this for America's Got Talent and literally frames it before he starts singing it about this friend that he lost to death. And he's basically saying, I'm jealous that you went without me. And it's like, whoa, it communicates a completely different thing when he starts singing it. And it was like this, I don't know, it was a completely different emotional context to the song. And the judges all felt it, and it was a very cool moment. And so I go, in any of my specifically English classes, which wasn't the most free place, I suppose, especially on a university level, to express and to tease out some of these ideas.
That's a condemnation of a modern university.
Well, it is, but it certainly wasn't an art class. I'll just say it that way. I take issue with any teacher that would put themselves in the way of what the artist and the conversation to the artist and the
I'd certainly
and the
not
consumer
give the
are
teacher that.
There is interacting with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, I'm not a firm believer that.
But are you a death of the artist person too?
No, I'm not. That's
I don't
the
go
thing.
that far.
No, I'm not either. But because I would say Ayn Rand has a point in saying that you have to draw the line somewhere. But I do take issue with people that act like it must be my interpretation of the art or it's not correct. And I'm like,
Well, it depends. I think if you are unable to argue for it, then I do not give much credence.
Sure.
If you say, well, it makes me think this, why? I don't know. It just does. It's like, okay, then I don't. Your opinion's useless.
I agree. I would agree.
I think you can perfectly say, okay, we can both have different interpretations, and here's the reasoning. And then at that point, I'd say, well, the reasoning then is let the reasoning decide which of these holds the most water.
Well, and is there a right answer?
And in some ways, this is why I don't. To say that the author gets to determine what you're supposed to get out of the work is not. I don't want to give them that much. It's death of the author, not death of the artist, but it applies to all forms of art. It's like, do they get to decide simply by being the creator of the thing? I
think they have the most say.
I would say, I would argue that's like, okay, you could make the argument that if you got something else out of it and you can reason why, then your argument is also valid.
Sure.
But I think under most circumstances, unless they're a sort of subconscious, James Joyce, I forget that guy's name. Wow, what's it called? I've forgotten it. Is it called flow of consciousness? I think it's something different than that, but similar. Stream of consciousness.
Stream, yeah.
Where it's like the author doesn't even really think about it, and they're just kind of saying, it's like, okay, maybe you could make an argument that they don't know what the heck they're doing either in those cases. But usually the author is going to have spent the most time thinking about the work, and thus they will know more of the ins and outs of everything than anyone in the audience could.
Right, and I suppose
thus their interpretation, at the very least, should be given higher weight, if not the absolute.
100%. Well, and what's interesting to me is I think that is true as a consumer too, because I believe the more you know the creator, the more you understand the work.
Well, and that's true that's why you can have a favorite artist.
Right.
You can say, this is why I think I could make the case that Billy Joel and I see the world somewhat similarly. because I like not just some of his songs. I like that almost in all of his songs there is tinges of a worldview I recognize. It's like I bet Billy and I could have an interesting conversation because I think we would kind of get each other. I'm being very presumptuous again. I mean, if Billy ever wants to have dinner, I'm available.
And I'm crashing that party.
But that, I think, is why you can have a favorite artist, because you understand their worldview, and thus, anytime they produce something, you're likely to see something in it you recognize, even if it's a different thing.
Now, the fun thing for me is when I actually recognize and or am revealed parts of myself as well in a work.
Well, on a creative aspect.
On both a creative aspect and a consumer aspect. If I'm listening to a song and it's literally revealing something about who I am.
But see, you say that you don't tend to find that, which I find interesting.
I don't tend to find that. What do you mean?
You have acted as though it was odd to you that I do that, where it's like I use the thing to search myself, and you're like, that's odd because I.
Well, it's not that I'm searching.
You've almost described it as though like I search for. I guess what's the way to put it syntactically? I seek. The way you have phrased it is it's like I seek myself through works, whereas you seek works, not exactly through yourself, but like, we could almost even go back to the audiophile thing where it's like, do you seek the high quality audio as you seek music so that you can listen to high quality audio, or do you seek high quality audio so you can listen to the music? It's like, it almost seems as though you...
and that's the
it seems almost as though you would rather search for emotions and find the art, whereas I would search for the art to find the emotions.
I think it's not dissimilar to the way in which we create, that we receive as well, because for you, it's far more process-based.
Though, because...
It's not. Listen, mine is revelatory.
You act like mine is revelatory. You act like it's odd that mine is revelatory, even.
No. Because you are literally digging at a particular character in order to understand yourself. But again, subject-based, and then emotion later, whereas I am going, what's the first thing that connected me to Victor was not his particular character. It was the emotion all of a sudden that he had. And I'm going...
In the one scene.
Okay.
But see, I suppose I knew quickly. Well, we'll get into this, actually. This is part of what I wanted to get to the bottom of is I guess the question... Because the way you have described it, and perhaps this was more me receiving than you giving, I feel like what you're saying now is different than the way you have said it before, because you have almost, or again, maybe you've not intended this. I have had almost an instinct or the impression rather, that you find it odd that I would seek revelation about myself in a piece of art. And almost as if, like, you would rather...
seek the art out that I am feeling?
Yes. And I'll admit, and again, perhaps you don't intend it this way, there was a part of me the first time we had this conversation about Arcane, where I was like, are you attempting to suggest that you fully know yourself already?
No.
Because there was a part of me that I was like, I doubt that if that's what you're saying.
No.
If only because I don't think any of us do.
No, exactly.
But then I was like, how else do you discover things about yourself than by art? Whether created or received.
I suppose the vehicle of art serves two purposes. It serves as a catharsis for the ail that I have, as well as a means of revelation for myself. So I grant you, I may have not even blown off, that's not the right word, downplayed the role of revelation in art form. I do think that what I was intending to communicate was more about the idea that I tend to start from the emotion first and not the subject, whereas you have that reversed.
I don't know.
Even in the
But see,
context
I don't know
of
that
digging
can
it.
be entirely true, though, because subject-based, if you were to try and draw comparisons without the use of emotion, then you wouldn't, none of my arcane characters make sense. If you were to just compare based on subject alone, they have to rely on emotion.
Well, yes, but again, I waited. Well, and that's what I guess. So, walk me through your process, because, like, okay, so no, but I'm just saying, like, you started watching Arcane. What caused you to be drawn to, if not emotion, the particular characters?
Well, it had to have been emotion. I don't deny
Right?
that.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
But
So-
the way I would describe it is, I resonate with characters sometimes before I know why.
See, and
And
that's
that's
the part
what prompts the revelation.
But that's the part that I go, I don't. That's what I was getting at that I didn't understand, because
But see, how is that not revelation like you're describing? Or are you hoping that the art will match you rather than you match the art?
I think that's it. That's more.
Where it's like suddenly, now I see that Victor's me.
I'm more selfish that way. I start from a really.
How is this art going to reflect me?
I am super garish and like that's super.
This is what I wanted.
Super boorish.
This is what I was trying to get into. Is like, is that what you mean?
I do mean that, which is a terrible reflection on myself. Is I wanted to mean something to me.
But
No,
see, the way you described the Victor scene, it's like that's exactly what I was describing. Is you suddenly say, "Oh, I get this now." I suddenly feel a kinship
because I don't
with
know
this
that I
character.
have ever blown up a person's life that
Yeah,
way.
I've never accidentally
Like, even
murdered my family.
No, I'm
But
talking
why do
even
I feel sympathy with
metaphysically.
a character? Oh, I thought we were getting into Arcane again. I thought it was because when you talking about blowing up a person, I'm like, well, he did.
No, I was talking about Arcane,
Oh,
but I'm saying like
It's not
even
metaphysical at that point.
No, in the show it isn't, but I'm
Yeah.
saying even for myself.
But this
like,
is
I
my
don't know
question:
that
is
I
why
would-
do I feel some sort of kinship and sympathy with a child who accidentally murders a family? I've never done that. Never come close to doing
But
that.
I'm saying even on a metaphysical level, you don't feel like you've done that.
I suppose if you, I guess
That's what I'm saying.
the
I
only
don't-
way left. But do you feel like you've disintegrated a person for your own, not even for your own gain, out of your own blindness?
Maybe, yeah. I certainly do feel that. I will say this. As much as I put on the... Ooh, man, this is... I don't like talking about Arcane.
I do. This is why.
As much as I would... There's very bad optics for me, which I'm a very heavily focused optic person.
You've said that more than once now about Arcane, that it just makes you feel bad about yourself. Which is weird.
It's not that it's bad.
It doesn't make me feel bad about myself. It mostly...
It just is.
I don't even know what it does to
It's very
me.
boorish. But I just go. I talk about as best as it depends on me living at peace with everybody, but I also know that there have certainly been times where my negligence or lack of forethought has affected others negatively. But see, that's why that scene was so impactful to me, was because it was incidental. It wasn't
Well, it has to be by nature. If you...
right.
But so
But
it
it was
almost
still
snuck,
his
So it's interesting that
negligence.
it snuck up on you.
It did. Well, which is why that scene was
I
so
could
like,
sense it.
boom, all of a sudden it just happened, and I was like, I was kind of sitting there in awe. Good gracious, it's me.
See, I don't know that I had that. Okay, I did, but it was not. This is what makes it difficult to describe, because again, I think we haven't really given an underlying difference in that. In both cases, it's an emotional first.
Yes.
So that does not support the theory of the subjective or the subject to emotion pipeline versus the emotion to subject pipeline. Both of us started with emotion, and I suppose the only reason we ended up at different subjects is because they were different emotions.
Sure.
In which case, this whole theory falls apart.
It doesn't specifically fall apart. I still think that there's a...
Or is it perhaps, well, going to resurface to the broad level, you might argue rather than that we create art in the same way we receive it, we might, in fact, create art the opposite of the way we receive it, except that doesn't happen in your case. So that theory falls apart too. Because I was going to say, in both cases with music, which is how we started this, and with the show, it's the emotion that causes the resonance, and then a subject is found.
Yeah.
But when I create art, I start with a subject it's almost like I have to reverse engineer the process.
Well, that's what I was getting at.
But you don't reverse engineer the process. You do what?
Which is why I feel the music first. A scene, like I can disregard, like for instance, you and I talked about that song that was related to Caitlyn, and you actually said it's hard for you because it's
that first one?
Song related to Caitlyn. Whereas for me, I'm
I didn't mean it to come across like that. I have listened to it since, and I'm like, okay, this is a good song. But I still feel like that scene...
But see, that taints
that scene. No, it doesn't, because I don't hate Caitlyn. I just think...
hates Caitlyn?
No, I dislike Vi the most. Caitlyn is like, okay. Honestly,
and her song blows too.
As it is, I do feel a little bit oddly vindictive. Because it's like, okay, you've got the one character who literally murders the most people in the show. And then there's the drug king, there's the kingpin character who's probably murdered more people just off screen in the show. And then there's the sort of dictatorial Fuhrer stand-in. And then there's just an angsty teenage girl.
And you're like...
And I hate her the most.
On her.
How dare you be so angsty, acting like the world revolves around you?
Yeah, but see, that's such an annoying...
Maybe that is what it tells me. Is that I'm just like... How dare you think the world revolves around you? Maybe that is the thing. It's like, I just am annoyed by Vi annoys me because she has the opposite of my worldview.
Well, maybe. I have found, again,
I find people who think the world revolves around them very annoying. And perhaps that's because I think the world revolves around me.
That's the impertinence thing that I hate. That's a pet peeve of mine. It's like, you...
Now we're talking about how much I hate Vi. So again, that's my point. I don't actually hate Caitlyn. I think Caitlyn's fine. My main argument in that discussion was that I think the scene is what makes the song impactful rather than the other way around. I think that song without the art behind it is less impactful than the scene with the art.
I don't agree. I actually think listening to the song...
I suppose, I guess if you were to watch it without any music, it would suffer.
No, I'm not saying that.
I guess you got the point
saying
there.
For me, I actually would reverse those two. I think when you remove the visual, for me, it's more impactful than it is less.
Well, anyways, I forgot. Why were you bringing that up again?
Because I was getting at the idea that for me, even in the show, I do start with the abstract, the music, the actual feeling of the scene before I start looking at the characters of the scene. Like tone. Okay, so here's scene to me, if I can describe, like first time you see Piltover versus first time you see Zahn, right? You go, there is a specific tone that it's communicating.
Sure.
That I pick up on before I start looking at any characters.
But I don't know that anyone does it differently because, that's why you start with an establishing shot, is to say, here's where we are, here's context for what's about to happen.
Sure.
So, I don't...
Obviously, they dump you in the deep end in Arcane, the very first pilot episode. They just kind of drop you into the middle of the emotion, which is then a good precedence for the show. You are getting plunged and you're not coming out till you're good and drowned.
I don't know that this has elucidated anything, though. I feel like it's only... Because it was making a lot of sense saying, well, we start with different things and thus we do the process in reverse. But it seems like that's not entirely true. And yet, why did it make sense to say it that way?
I don't know.
Because the point is, if both of us are starting with an emotional reaction and that leads us to different characters, then that doesn't explain unless it's just a consumerist thing where it's like, because in the same way as I can enjoy music without being creatively inclined towards music.
And I would say I can appreciate art, but I don't know that I ever go, I understand / resonate with the particular methodology of their brushstroke or
Oh, but see, I don't know that I do that either.
Well, you kind of do that. I'm just kidding.
I mean, I can definitely see how techniques lead to different impressions. But that's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the impression.
Well, then
I'm interested in the meaning and how well it's done is a secondary.
Back to the audio file versus the...
Well, yeah, it's like I don't care how clear it is if it's not a good song. In the same way that
song bites.
Well, yeah, it's like
this in 4K
I could watch a movie in 8K and I don't think I'd care if it was boring. It's like, yes, it might be really crisp and high resolution and all that, but I'm not interested in that.
Again, hence why you can go back to an 8-bit game and actually still
yeah,
rock
but
it.
You don't like that though, it seems. You've
described this.
You've described how you find old graphics difficult to get over sometimes.
This is not true. I've been the one that suggested that we go back to the Pretendo and record.
You have acted as though you... More so with film than with games, I suppose.
Maybe.
You've acted like, special effects from this day were bad and I can't get over them.
Well, okay. With the very special case, if you're talking about the 80s films we watched, where I just go, what?
Okay, but why... That's not an excuse just to say they're from the 80s.
No, but I mean, there's specific mediums I feel like that are more forgivable in that. Like, I mean, again, I would gladly play Comic Zone from Sega over, which isn't very much 8-bit, maybe 16-bit. It was a little more res than super, super low. But over something that is a more modern game that doesn't have a lot of meat. I mean, it's just kind of... But, I mean...
Well, so the problem is we're describing different things, but we resound to the same thing.
Which is what?
Because, okay. Let's go back to...
Just look.
You said...
You're starting to sound like Biden.
For a second ago, you agreed with me, and it seemed like we were going to go somewhere. You were saying you thought it was odd that I would do something. I forget what. We're talking about how I found it... You resonate with a character before you fully understand why, and that's what makes me want to dig in, and you thought that was weird. Was that what we were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you resonate with a character, and then you dig into the character, whereas
in order to find out why. But
right.
then, but see, you're saying that the reason Victor thrust himself upon you was that...
You're so weird with that.
Well, he did.
Receive it.
I'm just saying... Was it simply the fact that the similarity hit you before you knew it? Because that actually would be the opposite, where you were describing, I found myself resonating with a character that I didn't share any superficial traits with, and that made me wonder why. But I had to wonder that. There was a period at which I was, whereas it seems like you're saying, suddenly Victor was you and you didn't notice it until that moment.
It happened all at once. That's very true.
So in that case, you did the opposite, where the subject hit you and then the emotions happened. Because you're going, oh, well, except, yes, it's an emotional moment, but this is where perhaps the subject emotion, this is why art is difficult, and perhaps even these terms aren't clear as they could be.
But I think that
the resemblance hits you before.
But it's the simultaneous versus the more methodical. That's again the. I sit in the moment. You methodically express it.
I feel like these are hollow platitudes. I don't think that helps elucidate anything.
No, I'm saying, okay, visually you're expressing it. Sometimes it could take you months to work on a particular piece.
Oh, okay. You're talking about in the creation. Well, see, that's where I'm wondering if there might not be a clear correlation between creation and consumption.
Mustn't there be, though?
I would think so, but it seems like maybe not. Because I suppose I can't deny that ultimately the point of the art is the communication. The subject is necessary in order to get there, but that's not the point of it.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with you that every emotion needs a subject in order to.
But I guess so. The real question,
vehicleize.
I suppose, it's not fair to say that you seek the subject via emotion. It seems like you just seek the emotion, but you get there first. Whereas I seek the emotion, but have to go through a subject most of the time. But then that doesn't explain
but that's
why.
what my point
that doesn't
is.
explain why I felt resonance with characters that I didn't understand. Because that means clearly the emotion was coming through, and I didn't know why. But maybe you're just more content to be like,
I don't know why.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's
And I guess maybe
100%
for me, that's where it's like, okay, but I need the subject as a means of clarifying.
There's
the
a
emotion.
song I
can't
wish
just
to show you
I can't.
now.
Well, this explains the joke of your ocean of feelings,
Yes.
where it's like
Doesn't it?
whereas for me, I'm like, emotions don't make sense until they've been contextualized.
Wow.
In some ways, I don't actually think that that's untrue for me, where it's like, it's not that I don't feel them, it's that I almost don't. I experience them externally until they make sense to me. Then they're mine. This is sounding awfully robotic, I suppose. This is why Data's my favorite character in Star Trek. So it's like I had an affinity for Jinx for some reason I couldn't quite grasp until it made sense, and then I was like, oh, okay. Whereas you're saying it's almost like you didn't really think much about Victor until suddenly it was
Correct.
like, he's me, and
Correct.
but see, that's interesting is that seems weird, I guess, actually,
What's interesting is that
Well, 'cause
actually makes
but
sense as far as our divide. What is that? Maybe.
because that actually makes it seem like, strictly speaking, the subject of that scene, you're engaged with the subject is what grabbed you, not the emotion. Obviously, they happen simultaneously, kind of. But you didn't feel the emotion until the subject matched you. Whereas I felt the emotion before the subject matched me, and then I made sense as to why. Is that a fair characterization?
Sorry, now I'm distracted trying to find you a lyric that I think perfectly encapsulates this
What?
from Snow Patrol.
Because this is now flipping us on our head again. Where this would actually, I suppose, support the theory that we create the opposite of how we receive. If you don't take objection to what I just said.
Sorry.
You're saying, it's difficult.
The character hit me all at once. Yes, I did. I had not.
But it was his
agreed.
actions in the it's like you didn't feel the emotion until the subject made sense. Because you didn't care about Victor until that moment happened.
Correct.
And I would argue that's subjectual. If that's a word I'm coining. Obviously, it's emotional at the same time because in art, you can't always, in fact, good art, you can't at all separate the subject from the emotion. But my point is, if what you're saying on an analysis level is, I suddenly understood in this moment that he has inadvertently hurt someone because of his own his own blindness, and suddenly that affects me. It's like, oh, I see myself in that. And then the emotions hit you. Is that a fair way of describing it? That first the subject had to match you and then the emotions could happen?
Then the emotions were more, I would say that moment was like subject hit me because the fact that there was an immediate resonance in that moment, but then now all of a sudden I'm looking for his emotions to continue to sync up, which they did. Does that make sense? So like it was like boom, there's the subject, and then as I continued
But
to
you didn't
heartbeat alongside
I guess
of him,
I
there
guess
was
my
a bit of
point
a
is
sinking.
the sync happened between you and the subject first. It sounds like. And then the emotions followed. You didn't feel the resonance with him until that moment. And then you felt the resonance from then on.
Right.
See, that's interesting. So if I'm perhaps I'm being too analytical here, but that does sound like the opposite of the way I've described Jinx. I'm going, I resonated with her before I knew why, before we had any similarities. Arguably, we know we don't have any similarities except on the metaphysical. Whereas you're saying, I mean, this is where it gets dicey, is you're going, okay, obviously, I should hope you've never disintegrated someone by accident. But the point in the moment isn't
emotionally.
Yeah, well, but see that. But that's what I'm getting at is I don't think that the reason I like Jinx is because I feel as though I've hypothetically murdered my family. Like, that's not it.
But see, that's why it's different.
But see, that's what. So it sounds as though, and I keep repeating this simply because I'm still parsing it. You needed the subject to mirror you before you connected with them.
Correct.
And I connected with the subject before they mirrored
held
me.
the mirror up. Yes, that's correct. You created.
And I had to go and see why. Where's the mirror?
Exactly.
What's the similarity that I would feel this way?
Whereas I was,
which creates a bit of an odd. It's not how I would have thought that it would go, because I would have thought with your Counselor Troyness that you'd be like. It seems interesting that you didn't connect with the character until you shared a similarity with them. Not obviously not a literal one necessarily, but a sort of metaphysical.
Why is that?
Well, because why? Well, because you. I mean,
I can counsel somebody without.
Well, that's not what I mean by Counselor Troy, though. I mean the sort of like, I sense your emotional state before I even deal with you, sort of thing. You're the. I mean, what's the word? I'm now forgetting the word for that.
The depth. The depth of my...
Empath, that's the word.
Yeah, I'm certainly an empath.
And it's interesting that I, strictly speaking, based on this description, I connected empathically before there were any similarities to justify such a thing.
Yeah.
Which would certainly not be the way I'd think I'd approach any interaction. Normally, I would only, at least in an interpersonal reaction, I'd be like, I don't feel connection with you until there's some kind of a match between us. And it's odd that you are feeling the opposite way, because in an interpersonal context, it seems as though that's flipped.
Well, but that is flipped for me, too.
What do you mean?
I don't... You're saying... In an interpersonal context, you would be more like, you have to mirror me first before I move ahead. I would say the opposite is true. And for an empath, I can walk into.
But then why is it in an artistic sense that you didn't connect with this character until he mirrored you?
I don't know.
Whereas that's what I would do in an interpersonal context, but in the artistic context, I did the opposite.
Which is the juxtaposition for me, too. It's very odd. That's because I would say, in an artistic level, I would say there's a immediate mirror. Okay, now this is the person that kind of continues to sync with me. Whereas in an interpersonal context, I can walk into a room, pick up on an emotion or a particular person, whether like I could be a brand new stranger in a room, walk into the room, and if somebody's got like something that they're dealing with or something that's major, I know that, sense that before even speaking to them. Which is weird, and it's something it sounds oddly, I don't know what to call it, because anything I call it is going to sound either uber spiritual or uber, like, new agey.
No, there's scientific reasons behind his body language. And
yeah, I mean, I pick up on those things without
evolutionarily speaking, it's like there's
like, I even resist using the word empath because I feel like it has such a weird mischaracterization now that I'm like, no, these people that act like they're empaths.
But CIA people can do this, so it's like it can be learned.
Yeah, exactly. And it also can be honed to be more logical, I suppose. Most people that I would say claim to be empaths, and I'm going to say that because I really find this to be an annoyance, is like, no, you're just an emotional person that needs to get a grip. Whereas an actual empath, I feel like, not only can pick up on the emotions of others, but also controls and handles their own emotions well. Like that, to me, is what it should be representative of an empath. That's the Counselor Troy that says, okay, I've got, whatever.
But then it's odd that you'd think that in artistic contexts that would be accentuated rather than minimized. Or would you not think that? Because you'd think...
I think that
the whole point of an
artistic context is the one time I can be selfish. That sounds super ridiculous, but it's like, I want to make it about me this time. And not be looking for other people's emotions. Like, I'm not trying to study the character's emotions first.
Yeah, but I'm not either. It's not like I'm studying these characters going, it happens naturally. At least I would think it does. It's like I wasn't analyzing all the characters and going, I'm finding the most similarities between myself and Jinx, because that isn't true. Again, if you started only with the subject, you couldn't probably find a different character from me. So it's odd that, I guess this raises the question of what even is your attitude towards art?
What do you mean?
Well, we sort of touched on this, but it's like, it seems like you don't seek out art as a means of exploration of emotion. Perhaps because you don't need it for that purpose. And I do, I suppose. As I said, it's like I don't process an emotion until it makes sense to me. Thus, art is the only way of making emotions make sense.
Whereas I say, I need to find this lyric. Because to me, I feel that it
Whereas you're saying perhaps art's the one place where
where it doesn't need to make sense.
It
doesn't have to be resolved, in other words.
I don't disagree with that sentiment. That, like, art doesn't have to have a happy ending, or it doesn't have to always be super clear. So it doesn't have to have an obvious meaning. But I suppose there's a part of me that just says...
There it is. It's this one. Okay.
What other purpose does it have, then, if it isn't to be explored? I guess to just be experienced. But see, this is why it's taken me so long to drill into all this stuff. Is you're like, Arcane was fun. It was an experience. And I'm like, but what did it mean? And you're like, I didn't think about that. And I'm like, why?
No, it's not that I didn't think about it. It was.
But you actually almost said you did, where you're like, you kind of just let it happen to you, and we're like, oh yeah, that was an experience.
Okay.
And then I had to be like, but does it mean anything to you? And then you were like, yes, but it means negative things to me.
I'm going to read a full passage because it's very impactful in my opinion, but there's a particular line I'll focus on in just a moment. So this is from Snow Patrol. It's a song called Talking About Hope. It's a great song. It says, I fell in love with you again, but I don't know how to tell you of it. Through the distance now and then, I still see you in the dark that you lit. And I know my name, and I know your name, and I'm not talking about hope. I'm not talking about fire. I'm just trying to make sense of this desire. So put your hand in my hand, and put your head on my heart. And God, don't tell me you can't tell them apart. And then this is the line. I finally figured it out. It's not meant to make sense. It's just meant to be said in the present tense. Boom. No. That, to me, is 100% emotion and art encapsulated.
No.
Because there's a point in which emotion has to be... Again, this is the whole pathos thing. And I'm jumping into the philosophy now. This is why I'm entirely Aristotelian. Because he insisted that pathos has to be considered in any sort of actual context of interaction.
I don't know that inherently follows from what you just said, though.
No, but what I'm saying is the idea that emotion,
because that, if you want to talk about not necessarily
2 feet.
being new agey, it's like, well, that's a pretty new agey.
What, pathos?
No, not before that. I'm saying, well, in art. Where then do you draw the line with the urinal submission, where it's like, oh yeah, all it has to be is what is, you know. There doesn't have to be any meaning or rules. See,
it has to still be good. Ayn Rand. It's the whole idea that Ayn Rand.
But how do you define good? You can't define that an artwork is good unless you define what it was meant to be. Art can't be good unless it does what it was trying to do. And if you don't know what it was trying to do, how do you know that it did it?
It's not that you don't need to know what it's trying to do.
You can't argue that something is good unless, like, how do you argue that food is good? Well, it's like it's about the taste. It's about, you can criticize certain things about it, but you can only do that if you know what it was attempting to be. And you can only criticize art if you know what it was trying to do. So art can only be called good if it succeeds at what it was attempting.
Okay.
And if in order to make that distinction, you have to know what it was attempting. So to say, well, it doesn't have to have a meaning, it's like, I don't even think your subconscious believes that.
No,
something in your subconscious is connecting with this.
It's not that it doesn't have to have a meaning.
It just does that meaning doesn't have to be analyzed? Well, okay, but if something can't have a meaning if it doesn't make sense. I don't deny that it may not make immediate sense.
Well, that's all I'm saying.
Like, but see, that's like saying, well, it's like, well, I mean, you're not, I suppose
the pathos versus okay, what you're doing is I'm putting the
There's a logic to this, but I'm not going to examine it?
No, I'm saying pathos, logos, no, sorry, not logos. Pathos, logos is word, though.
Logic. Well, it also stands for logic.
So pathos, logos, and then there's
ethos.
one other one. Yeah, ethos. You're putting logos, I would argue you're putting logos, ethos, and then maybe pathos, if you consider it.
Well, I mean, John thinks I'm correct to put logos at the top. There's a reason we call him logos, not pathos or ethos.
Sure.
Because it's the underlying meaning.
Sure.
Yeah, but see, if the underlying meaning isn't the point of art, then what is?
I would not disagree that the underlying meaning is important and that it's necessary and vital to understanding art. I'm just saying there are certain things on an emotional level that you cannot make sense of as you feel them, and you have to just express them nonetheless. Which is why something like music makes more sense to me.
You bottle them and ferment them, and then they will make sense.
See, this is, again, you coming at it from I'm going to sit here and construct something months at a time until it does make sense, whereas I go, I'm going to sit at the piano and get this out, and then later...
Yeah, but in some ways getting it out feels like the lazy way, not to be too rude. But it's like now it's just everyone else's problem.
No, it's not everybody else's problem.
I felt distraught, so I made this piece of music, and now y'all are going to have to deal with it.
I don't share that particular piece of music until I have then come back to it later and gone.
But will you come back to it later if you've gotten it out already?
Yes.
Because I find that I don't want to write something down until I feel like I've thought about it sufficiently.
Whereas I write something down and then come back to it later in order to understand it.
No.
But see,
the only reason I write things down is because I feel like I'm done with them. It's like now I can write it because
for me it's
circulated enough that I think I've got it so that I can be written.
No, this is the linear. Like I put things out in order to understand them. That's fascinating that that's so much different. Because so with Arcane, I had to experience it first before I then started analyzing why this felt that way.
I'd like to point out I had to make you analyze it.
No, but I'm saying...
You experienced it just fine. You just didn't want to analyze it for some reason. Until I came along and... Explain!
Because I knew that the optics were terrible.
Look at it! I want all of you to look at it!
Because, again, Victor's like, yeah, let me help you with that. Yeah, I wasn't asking.
You could, Victor is... Even with Season 2 involved, I think Victor is probably one of the least controversial characters in the show.
I disagree.
No. He's still, even with the villain arc, people are like, no, we still understand him. We still get it. We still like him.
So, at best, he's a dictatorial leader. At worst, he is a
Not even
mass genocide individual that just basically says, yes.
I think you're being uncharitable, because the whole point is he's not. His ultimate goal was simply to, and I think the reason why this is acceptable is he obviously is mistaken in the belief that the universe could be made perfect.
But see,
But he isn't just making people do, it's not.
That's the whole thing about making sense, though. The bottom line is he gets to the end of it and he goes, I just realized it's not about it all making sense. It's about some things just
If it
being
wasn't about sense. No, see,
striving,
I don't take
like,
that to be his point. His point, in
The end
essence,
of
the thing that makes
striving-
him interesting is that he's right the whole time. He actually is right at every step. Even when he's being villainous, he's doing it because he's right. The problem is he doesn't have the wisdom. He doesn't have the temperance at that point. Only
that's
his
true.
Only his literal future self, who has succeeded at what he's trying to do, sees the futility of it.
And
But it's not because he's wrong.
And that part I very much resonate.
It's because he's going, yes, it is entirely the fact that we have free will that is to blame for all of the world's problems.
I would say
The problem he doesn't recognize, though, is that that is also the only thing that makes life worth living.
temperance is probably my worst virtue. Like, meaning I poorly express that.
Okay. Good. I mean, good to know about yourself. But that's why
probably
But see,
my
that's the thing, is that I don't think even in those instances he's not actually wrong fully. Like, he actually is correct. He's just missing a part of the equation. Whereas I think you could say of someone, and I mean, there isn't anyone who's like totally off the reservation. There's some who are closer to off than others. But it's like even Caitlyn being, because she goes through a similar arc of like, well, the world sucks and now I'm going to
Suck it.
basically, where it's like, okay, I respond to trauma.
literally, in
I just respond to trauma with dictatorship. It's like, well, okay, both of them do that, but she does it out of much less justifiable reasons.
Sure.
It's like Victor's correct when he's being villainous. She's not.
Well, I would say he's.
It's an understandable.
He's more universal. She's
Yeah, it's like
more
it's understandable that she that would react that way. So even, I mean, as much as she's not one of my favorite characters, I still think it makes sense on a writing level. It's like, okay, justifiably, it's not justifiable, but it is understandable that someone under this context would react this way. And then she does manage to bring herself out of it in the end because she realizes it's not her.
Sure.
And most of the characters are like that, but it's like, my point in all this is saying, I think you're assuming that it's worse than it is, because Victor is still considered to be one of the better characters, because even when he's acting wrongly, he's doing it right.
Well,
he's so right that he's wrong.
welcome to my life. I'm just kidding. No, I would say that is certainly a good representation of my internal battle, though, too. Is like, how much do I just force something through and become villainized for
It's
it?
actually the same arc, you could argue.
Between whom?
I'm saying it's the same arc in all of season 2 as it is in that one moment.
Oh, yeah.
I'm seeking something that I think is good, but I'm not aware of what the consequences of it are.
Right.
And then he realizes it, and then he's like, he gives up again.
Well, and of course,
So it's like, in fact, those are just the exact same sequence. One is expanded.
One is encapsulated. Yeah, exactly.
It's like, but it's the exact same thing. So I forgot how we got. I don't know about the particulars of Victor and why we're.
No, but what I'm
how
getting
it
at
relates
is
to the
that
broader whole.
what I'm getting at is that I think I get things out and then analyze them second, and you almost analyze them in the process and then get.
Because I think that once you analyze them, they are fixed, or once you write them, they are fixed in some ways.
Yeah, and for me, that's not
it's
the
like-
case. I'll write something. I'm like the one that would make multiple notes on various things. Like if Ruben ever tried to synthesize a story that I had scrapped together over multiple years, it would be like the equivalent of of Tolkien's work trying to be synthesized by others and after his death. It's very much like, okay, there's a lot of random scraps of paper, and some of them don't even actually make sense and contradict one another, and this is a lot of work. Like, to me, writing is a part of the expression process.
Well, I
in
don't
order
deny
to actually
that.
get...
It's not as though a first draft comes out finished.
Well, that's almost what you're acting like, though.
Well, no, I guess it depends on... The reason I started journaling in the first place was because I actually found myself recycling thoughts. And I was like, and I catch myself doing this, and I don't know why sometimes, where it's like, I'll think about a subject,
We're
and I'll
both
kind of explore it.
overthinkers, that's why.
Well, but you seem to have more of an issue with it than I do. I know how to, I know how to tell myself to shut up.
That's that temperance coming back.
Even things like the tax conversation we started this all with was not the first time I've thought through that. I've thought through that more than once on the commute this week. But it's like, I think about it just because I'm curious, and then almost as a way of cementing it, I will think about it again, because they say that whenever you remember something, you're not actually remembering the initial event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it, neurologically speaking. I don't know how true that is. But they're arguing that the more you remember something, it becomes embedded, not because of essentially the analogy is given. It's like every time you think of a thing or remember something, you are treading a path that then gets more ingrained. So you're literally creating a rut in your brain that's like, this is a familiar path that we've walked on. And so I've used to catch myself doing that almost as a way of like cementing the argument in my mind, where it's like, if anyone ever asked me what kind of taxes I think have philosophical, morally correct political basis, I could give them this argument because I've already had this argument with myself plenty. And I found that once I got to a point where I felt like I had the argument well worked out, I still would do that, and then there would actually be, because the issue you get into, this is actually a bit of the mind palace problem. The thing that people don't know about the mind palace system, if you've only ever seen it from Sherlock Holmes, is you have to do it the same way every time.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that's completely ineffectual. Because it's like, okay, I know I memorized this, but in order to get access to that, I have to go through the whole thing first. I'm like, well, then I may as well just look it up. It'll probably take less time than mentally going through the whole process again. But I catch myself sometimes getting into that loop where it's like, well, I've started down this argument. My brain's going, oh, he's on the path again, and now I can't stop thinking about the argument that I've already well settled in my mind.
For you, it's more like that scene with in the first Matrix where they open the door and Neo looks down that long road and they're like, you know where that leads. Start walking if you want to go that direction, or you can actually stay with us and go this way.
I don't remember the first Matrix film. It was the longer ago that I watched it. I don't remember this sequence. But it is not unlike that, where it's like, I've trained my mind to follow the sequence of the argument such that if I ever get started on any one point of it, I have to finish it. And so that was why I started journaling. It was like, I'm going to actually write some of these thoughts down so that I can stop thinking about them. So that's
I understand what you're saying. And there are times, I guess, it functions as that.
Because I would rather...
I guess for me, it's
ruminate.
more of... But see, I ruminate out loud.
The world's too dangerous to ruminate publicly.
Well, that's why I do it journaling privately. Because then I can ruminate all on my own.
See, the thing
If someone found that journal, I'd be
the thing that's
hosed.
funny about it, though, is... For the first couple weeks of when I started journaling, I had like all the ideas were coming out at once. I'm like, here's all of my political philosophy and all of my moral analysis of various questions. And then once I had gotten rid of all the backlog of things that I kept cycling, I was like, well, I don't know what to journal about anymore. So now I'm just talking about what I did today, and like, this is kind of dull. And the problem I have is I catch myself.
We're still mind
where it's
journaling.
like I'll have been thinking of something this day, but I don't want to write about it yet because I feel like I'm not done thinking about it. And if I write about it, to me, to write about it is the flush valve. Where it's like, I've thought about it, it's been circling around, and I'm happy with where it is, so now it can be permanently stored in this state.
For me, writing it is like a way of saying, like, because I'll circle back to it months later and go, oh yeah, I'm still thinking about that.
See, for me, it's a cleansing. That's why they recommend journaling. It's like it's a way of getting the thoughts out so you don't have to keep thinking them.
Well, that's...
And I'm like, but if I want to keep thinking them, then I don't want them out yet.
I'll say it's true that
I'm not going to swallow until I've done chewing.
Obsessing about it if I get it out. Because then I know it's in a safe spot that I can come back to later. It's a little bit like, okay, so I'll describe it this way. I hate the YouTube algorithm in that there are random times that it'll refresh a video that I'm like, oh crap, I was meaning to watch that and I wasn't able to. So I find myself saving tons to my watch laters because I see videos that I'm like, I don't want to lose it, but I can't watch it right this second. I do the same thing with
That's why I've
journaling.
started downloading some of those.
Well, I do the same thing with journaling where I go, I'm not able to actually give this its due rumination, so I'm going to write this down temporarily, and then I'm going to come back to it and actually think on it later. Like, so
I see. For
my
me,
journaling...
That's almost the opposite, is where you go and talk about compulsive. It's like, there is no such thing as I can't think about this now. My brain's like, you will. You're going to think about this until we've got it done.
Well, see, like, I would say...
But it's also not even that it's not like, oh, gosh, I'm plagued by this thought. It's like, I just enjoy, like, okay, why is it that... I had one the other day that I was like, it was...
What's the deal with the fruit bats?
No, it was actually, I was debating on the commute it's going to be really, these are the kinds of things that I'll think about just randomly because I'm interested in them. But it was something, I somehow got on the idea of proper prison reform and like what should the proper punishment be for various categories of crimes. And I was like, okay.
Within the prison
strictly speaking.
Like, you're talking about within the prison system? Like, once you're in
no,
and you rape somebody, then you have issues?
It was literally the argument that I got onto. I was like, okay, in a soundbite, I'd be like, well, yeah, you rape, death penalty, easy. But then I was like, okay, well, think about that. Is that just universal? Because how would you prove it? And it's like, how do you make sure you're not just killing people who have false accusations? I was like, well, there's DNA. Types of evidence. You could say that it only applies in certain cases where it can be proved these ways. And there was this whole thing. And then I came up with this idea. I was like, well, hang on a second. Why not, on a utilitarian level, say, okay, if you can be proven to have been or to have committed rape, you go to a work prison where you have to then pay for the benefits for basically the equivalent of child support, but you're in prison because you... And I was like, that makes actually more utilitarian sense, as much as I'm like, morally speaking, yeah, you just kill them because they're evil. But on a utilitarian level, we could extract resource from them. And I had this whole system in my mind. I was like, okay. And these are the things that I think about for fun. It's not like, oh gosh, I'm trying to go to sleep and I can't stop thinking about this. I can make myself stop, but then I'll just leave it in my mind because it'll be like, hey, remember that idea? I've got an addition to it. So I don't have to get stuff out. To me, getting stuff out is the finishing of it. Because I don't dislike
my
doing
journaling
it.
Rarely waxes boring because
mine only does when nothing. I haven't been thinking about anything. Like if I've just been busy and I haven't had the time to dedicate mental energy to something, or I'm in the middle of it. I'm like, well, this isn't ready to expound.
It's not ready yet.
Yeah,
for reading.
Because it's like I don't want it written until I can be done with it. It's like now it goes in the catalog of thoughts I've had.
Months that I don't journal, and then all of a sudden I'll feel a particular emotion that I can't get off my chest for days at a time. That I'll just then write down in the journal about like, okay, this is something that's going on, and then.
See, for me, that doesn't do anything unless it's done. Writing part of it. I'll still think about it then, so I'll have to write again about it later. Might as well write about it all at once when it's in a state Now, the thing that's interesting is like I'm not suggesting it's like, oh, yes, I won't write the book until I know it all by heart. Obviously, some things have to be workshopped. But even then, there is a part of me that's like, I have workshopped, and we'll get onto this. We've already talked about it before. It's like I've workshopped scraps of poetry that I've written into a finished whole, and I'm usually not as satisfied with those as the ones where I was like, it came out all at once.
Well, but that's again the muse hitting you. That's
Yeah, but that's not how art works, really.
that's how my art works.
Yeah, but then it doesn't work. Is my
Does
opinion.
work, I assure you.
No, because then it's I mean, don't take this personally. I'm speaking in a universal sense, but it's like, then what did you do?
Well,
If it was something outside of you that made this, then what part did you have in it?
It's not outside of me. It's the
Well,
because
I mean,
again,
yes,
the idea
arguably
that
it's something
still
within
a
you.
rendering
But it's like
mind.
obviously some amount of inspiration is required, but there is a part of me that's like, and this is in fact a lot of professionals say this, where it's like, if you only write when you feel like writing, that's by definition being an amateur.
Well, sure.
Whereas it's like, if you want to be a professional writer, you've got to write whether you want to or not.
Yeah,
I actually really liked, I forget who the author was, someone who made a point saying, I show up at the writing room every day at 8 o'clock. Whether the muse joins me or not is her decision, but she knows where to find me. I was like,
well,
that's the kind of mix of the two where it's like,
agreed.
I have to show up
100%.
in order. It's like, I have to actually be,
Well, that's
I
a
can't
little
just
bit-
be this is why I don't love the whole Charles Dickens, that one movie that we referenced before, because it comes across as much more like, oh, I'm just at the mercy of inspiration, and if it doesn't come, I'll be hopeless. And I'm like,
Well, I mean, he's certainly not idle when he's waiting for it.
He is a little bit. He's a little like there's the sequence at the beginning where it's like he just sits in front of the empty paper. I'm like, well, that's not how it works.
Well,
You have to start.
Yeah.
The thing that is annoying, and in fact, and this as much condemns me as anyone else. The fact of the matter is, I always found it fascinating how when I sat down to write, I would, and it wouldn't often be that hard. It was the sitting down that was the hard part. And it's like, once you start the tap, it actually will flow. The problem is starting it for some reason is really
it's a
hard.
little bit like in enacting flow state, like you can actually get to where you
like, yeah,
teach your brain to like, okay, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee, do this, and then I'll get.
Well,
into
that's the
flow
way to
state.
get into it. But I'm saying, I often found that it's like I didn't need to know what was going to happen. And this is what makes it very difficult for me, is if I sat down to start writing something, something would come out. But the problem is I didn't know what that was going to be until I did it. And I didn't like that, where I was like, no, I want to have an idea of where it's going to go. And my brain's like, no.
See, I enjoy.
You're not going to get that until you start. I'm like, but I don't want to start until I know where it's going.
See, I enjoy the not knowing.
Yeah, but the problem with that is then it never goes anywhere, at least in my case. It's like I wrote a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm like, okay, these are all great on their own, but they don't go anywhere because there's no plan. And my brain won't let me plan because it's like, nope, the words won't come until you start writing them. I'm like, but I don't know what they'll be. How do I plan what they're going to go? Well,
This is why I hate visual art, because if I sit down and try to create something in the same way that I do with music, I'll be like, I gotta just let the pencil flow, and then it's like I'm drawing circles for no reason. Whereas
well, because I've never sat down and been like, I'm just going to paint whatever. I paint a thing. And again, that's where it's like it's subject focused.
well, this is why I hate the art that's
And
like,
some people might not do that.
It's paint that's in various bevels on a canvas.
Yeah,
I'm
I
like,
put
that's not
I
art,
put a mop
that's-
bucket in the thing, and
Yeah,
then,
I hate that. It's like, no, it's
I
not
actually
art.
saw that
That's
as an
absurd.
advertisement where it was like puts a mop in a paint bucket and slashes it on. It's like, look at this is how I do it. And I'm like, this is not art. This is decoration at best.
Yeah.
It's the difference between art and entertainment. I think art and decoration are the same. Decoration is just static entertainment.
I like that.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it fills the space.
Yeah, you're pretty proud of that one.
Well, but I mean, it's like, it's the exact same thing. It fills the space, but it says nothing. And I don't like such things. Which is funny because I'm not a minimalist. I like filling the space, but I want the space to be filled with things that say something.
Well, yeah.
It's a bit of the Adam Savage, what is he, visual cacophony.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's only a cacophony if it's saying something. If you've got a bunch of things saying something to you, that would be a cacophony. If you've got a bunch of static images that don't mean anything, it's like, well, yes, it's visually dynamic, you could say, but it's not a cacophony because nothing's being said.
Yeah.
Any other points? I was going to milk this one.
We've milked it pretty good. It's already...
Going to talk about... Yeah, okay, so we already kind of touched on all this stuff. The only thing I was going to say, because I thought maybe I would have to defend my seeking the self through art thing, but it seems like I don't have to defend it anymore. I had prepared a defense, not exactly that it needed defending. Talking about how, well, because did we ever actually resolve that? I feel like we went off in a fruitful but unrelated direction. Talking about, what was the thing you thought was odd again? I've already forgotten it twice. It's the second time I forgot.
Again, you
that I
start
seek
from
to
the
analyze
outside.
something before I know why. I feel a
Right.
thing and then choose to analyze it, and in so doing discover something about myself.
Right.
And you think that's weird?
Because for me, again, it happens.
You won't feel the emotion until you've discovered it about yourself. Was that
No,
part of that same?
It was I feel the emotion, but I don't feel compelled to understand it first.
Well, there was also you might not feel the emotion until the parallel was obvious.
Right. Exactly.
Whereas I felt it beforehand and then sought the parallel, and that's apparently.
I wait for the parallel to.
Well, that's what I guess that's what I'm saying is when you're saying it's not so easy as simply saying I seek emotion through art and you seek art through emotion, because it's not exactly correct way of phrasing it.
It's a different relationship.
But you're saying
we have with art.
I am looking for parallels within. See, I don't know how to phrase it right.
I wait for the parallel.
You wait,
to come
yeah.
to
It's like
me.
you. I guess you wait for the art to reflect you.
Yeah.
Whereas I go in search of myself in the art.
Yes. Correct.
And I guess you find that strange.
You're just far more.
And I guess the reason why I felt it needed defense is that there was an error, and perhaps this was entirely on my side, where it was like, don't you know yourself enough already? And I was like, do you? Is that what you're trying to say? As though it's like I wait for the art to mimic me rather than for me seeking something in the art. But and again, that may not have been what you were intending to say,
No,
but I created
I
a
think
defense for that, just in case that is what you were saying.
I was meaning, I tend to. I know myself well enough to know what resonates with me, which I would argue you do.
But
too.
I would wager that that's probably not entirely true, because you wouldn't know that something would resonate with you if you've never experienced it before.
Well, that's true, but then I don't know that I would feel resonant with it. That's the thing.
Well, you don't know it, but you might. That's the point. The defense I had was actually I was going to relate to the Jordan Petersonism, because he's actually talked about before how genetically speaking, you are actually a different person genetically as a result of travel to do different places, because it's literally a biological stimulus. Certain things that you experience will actually activate latent genes that are specifically designed to respond to that stimulus. So if you never face that stimulus, you'll never actually activate that part of your genetic code. It's like, I think that's entirely true psychologically, and I think that's precisely why art exists personally. You're saying, I wouldn't know how I'd react to this situation until I see it. And obviously you may not want to see firsthand all sorts of things that might happen to you in life. I don't want to know what would happen if I accidentally murdered my whole family, but now I do, because I've seen it happen in a show. It's happened through a character that I feel was similar enough to me that their reaction to that would be similar enough to mine. Yeah. Going, now I know how I would react to this, and it would probably be similar to this character, which then makes you say, okay, despite superficial differences, something about the way this character was before, even though I didn't see it then, matches me. So then then it becomes an analysis of going, well, if I can understand this character, I can understand me. And again, it's not as though it's like I don't know who I am. It's just going, I've never been in this context. Therefore, I don't know how I would react, but I think I'd react like this person, which means I must share more in common with that person than is superficially obvious. There's my defense that it's not necessary. 2 for that one was. Is it thoroughly milked?
I mean, like, even with, I'm trying to think about, like, within the context of Victor, I feel as though, so if you've played early Assassin's Creed games, you have, like, the various benchmarks where they like your sync lines up on a DNA strand level. That's how I process a character matching me, if that makes sense. I don't then go, let's go back to just the character and go into parts that I didn't feel like specifically matched me and analyze how they actually could.
Well, but see, surely
Like,
you'd
that's the part that I
recognize
go,
the reason a character is well written, the more and more realistic they are as a person.
sure.
Which is why
but
Dostoevsky
realism doesn't.
and well, I don't mean realism. I mean they feel realized, like a fully realized person. They don't
Sure.
feel one-dimensional. They feel like a multi-dimensional character. They feel like a real person that you
Right.
could know. This is why writers who are acclaimed, similar to like Dostoevsky and the others, I forget who else Jordan Peterson talks about, but it's like he works because the characters he
Mostly
writes
Russian.
are so realized
Yeah.
that they make perfect sense. And I think Arcane is entirely that way. You're going,
Oh, yeah.
all these characters, every decision they make is so perfectly in keeping with their character that you watch it going, they couldn't have made any other decision. That's what makes it feel fascinating is, in some ways, the way I've described, a lot of people have described it as a modern Greek tragedy, which it is, because it's essentially, it's not entirely fatalistic to say like, well, nothing could have changed this. It's that it's difficult to describe. Obviously, things could have happened differently in the show, theoretically speaking, but given the way the characters are, it couldn't have happened differently than it did because those are the decisions those characters would make. They felt true to the character.
No, that's
Thus,
true.
nothing could have really been different. Yes, it could have theoretically, because someone could have theoretically made a different choice, but they would never make a different choice. The choice they made is the choice they would make as them. They wouldn't be them if they didn't make that choice. Therefore, and because those characters are so well realized, I think you can actually extrapolate things that don't immediately strike you as obvious based on things that later do. And you even described this, that you're saying, okay, once you analyzed it, you saw other parallels to Victor that weren't immediately obvious.
Right.
I think that's because he's a well-written character, that a character who undergoes this kind of moment and reacts in this way, if they're well realized, you can see that same thread in a different situation.
And obviously they make it
Even if that other
obvious.
situation was more subtle and you didn't miss it, you missed it then, but you saw it here, but you could maybe go back and learn something from that one.
With Sky, they make it rather obvious, but
It's a climactic moment, of course.
well, no, I'm saying like even just in the fact that the minute he becomes one with the arcane, she's present, and some people take that as more of like that's actually what happened to her. I take that more as his own mental kind of extrapolation.
I tend to lean more towards that may have actually been her.
Could be. I mean,
As evidenced by the fact that she is absorbed along with everyone else.
sure.
I mean, you could also make the argument that that's a mental shift in his own mind, which is equally valid. Both would make perfect sense, archetypally speaking. So I guess, yeah, sure. But that's what, again, this is why art is interesting to me, is because it facilitates these kinds of conversations. It's like, I don't deny that art doesn't have to be analyzed to be good, but the whole point of good art is the analyzing of it, because that's where the fruit is found. That's where the fun is.
Yes, that's where the fruit is found, but I also find the fun to be more, to me, in the immediate revelation, the actual experiential.
See, I don't know that that's the trope of like, if we could watch a show or a movie or something, or hear a song for the first time again, I don't often think of that. I can understand the appeal of it, but I think I've enjoyed Arcane far more in the time since I first saw it than I did when I first saw it, because of the fact that it's a constant source of interesting ideas and thoughts and discussions. It's like, I suppose for the novelty of it, it would be fun to experience that again. But it's like I have gleaned more things from the time since than I did.
Yes,
from
for
the
me,
first
I've
watching.
always found those arguments to be obnoxious, because I remember my mom basically talking about, well, that's the decision you made, but what if you made a different one? I'm like, why are we talking about this? That's in the past. I can't make a different one now, so what? And there's a part of me that feels the same way about something. What if you could listen to that for the first time again? It's like, well...
Oh, but it seems like you were just saying the experience, like the revelation, is the best part of it.
Well, but that
would
can
imply
be that can be revealed repeatedly and more...
Well, no, it would have to be something new revealed. You can't reveal something you know. Well, I guess it can get deeper, that's true.
Yeah, again, that's...
But don't the discussions facilitate that? I imagine if you were going to do it on your own, you'd have had to watch the whole show multiple times over to have the kinds of things we've revealed to them about.
Yes, of course. I mean, listening to music with other people always is more beneficial than listening to it by yourself. But I will tell you this, listening to one song repeatedly on repeat for a week will also get you the depth of like, I really understand this song.
I suppose that's true.
I obsess over songs in the same way that I would that kind of context within a show. I mean, like, I'm not exaggerating. Like, literally on repeat as I'm driving, I'll listen to
But see, it's
song.
interesting that I don't analyze songs at all. Which might put a hole in all the things we've just been saying. But in some ways, that's why I think music is a different category for me. Is that music seems to be what visual art is for you, where you're like, it doesn't have to be analyzed. I'm like, yeah, musically, no. You don't have to analyze that. It can just be. But like, narrative, writing, visual art, no, it needs to be analyzed. And I don't know why I do that. And again, I think it may just come down to the fact that like I don't know how to analyze music sufficiently because it's not subjective. Or, well, it is, but it isn't. The subject isn't the thing to be analyzed. It's the emotion. I'm like, well, I don't know how to analyze emotion. I need a subject to analyze emotion.
Whereas for me, I'm like, why are we trying to analyze this piece of art? Can't we just let it be?
Well, if it's a song, yes, I guess. If only because I guess I can't analyze a song.
I'm just saying.
Either that, I have watched
several Van Goghs.
I have watched videos. I have watched videos of people analyzing songs, and those I find interesting. But that's because they've done the analysis for me. So I guess it ultimately comes down to the fact that I suppose I don't process emotion directly. It has to be processed secondarily, either by someone else or by a subject I can analyze first. Psychologically speaking, that's probably the root of this whole conversation. Is that the reason I seek out a subject in art is because without the subject, I can't process the art or the emotion meant to be facilitated.
Well, there you go.
We did it.
We did. It's milked.
Well, there you go. Ow.
Taxes.
Taxes. That didn't work. Taxes like a rock. That didn't work at all. It didn't work either. Me buttons ain't.